Welcome to Heels, Handbags, and Hustle. Step in faith, carry love, pursue God's calling. This is your host, Rachel Earp, and I'm so delighted that you found my show. My podcast is dedicated to encouraging women to be more bold, confident, and secure in their work and femininity. I've had the privilege of bringing on many outstanding women who share their journeys, stories, and successes with us. I believe women should embrace their God-given gifts and abilities without the entanglements of fear, comparison, or past mistakes. As a wife, business owner, and mom of 2 boys, one with Down syndrome, I have found such joy in the community of supportive women. My prayer is that this podcast elevates each person who listens and inspires a closer walk with God. Now, let's get to it, friends. Well, friends, I just want to welcome you to another episode of Heels, Handbags, and Hustle. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're spending an hour with me today. And I have on the show Rebecca George, who I'm extremely delighted that she is back for another episode. So about a year ago, we did an episode together, and it was so special to me because her book changed my life. And her book is called Do the Thing, Gospel-Centered Goals, Gumption, and Grace for the Go-Getter Girl. So if you are a go-getter girl and you want to do the thing, this episode today is going to just inspire you and change your life as well. And she was so good, I brought her back again. So we're going to talk about some other things today. But Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on the show again today.
Oh, Rachel, I'm so glad to be with you. This is so fun. I love what you're doing over here, and it's just so good for my heart to hear you talk about the book and how it's impacted your life. That's so kind of you to say, and I'm just honored to be back. Excited about our conversation.
Thank you so much. And for my newer listeners who maybe they haven't had a chance to go back and hear the episode, could you just start and just share a little bit of your background story, and we'll just kind of take everything from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am an East Tennessee gal. I always say I'm from where Dolly's from, about 45 minutes away from Pigeon Forge. We live in a small town called Maryville, Tennessee, just right outside of the Smokies, and that's where I grew up and lived for many years before I married my husband, who is a lead pastor. And when we got married just before the pandemic, that moved me, he was already there, to Mississippi for a few years where we served together. And God moved us back in 2022 to our home, which is East Tennessee. And we're super glad to be back and serving in our local church there. And I just have the joy of doing the work you and I do with writing books and speaking on the road. And I host my own podcast called Radical Radiance, where we have conversations each week that point us back to what it looks like to radiate the heart of Jesus in everything we do in our life, in our work, our relationships. And so that's a big umbrella that a lot of conversations fall underneath. But I love getting to have conversations just like you do with amazing guests who have written resources and books and are gifted and skilled in certain areas that can teach us more about what that looks like, and look to scripture as our guide as we do so. And as you said, I released my first nonfiction trade book last year called Do the Thing, Gospel-Centered Goals, Gumption, and Grace for the Go-Getter Girl. And the good news is I am working through the editing process kind of as we speak. We had some good conversation about that before we hit record, and I'm super excited about that message. It comes out next April, and it is all I know it is all about longing and what do we do in seasons of waiting, and what does it look like to trust in God's timing. And so, yeah, I love women. I love Christian women. I love encouraging them and equipping them. And yeah, it's just a joy to be here. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, you are doing all the things, girl. I just have to say, I have been so blessed. I love your podcast. And of course, like I mentioned, your book. I truly can say your book is one of those things that changed my life in such a positive way. So much so that I sent it to several friends, and I just, I think the thing that really shined through for me, especially in your book, is you were kind of walking us through really figuring out what the thing is. And that was where I was at the moment when I got your book, held it in my hands, and was trying to figure out, well, there's so many things. What is the thing? And I was so captivated by the title of your book and how it encouraged me to really strip all of the distractions, the noise away, and take everything back to the source, which is God, and hearing his voice. And it helped me have more confidence with knowing that I can figure that out and God has something he has meant for me. And it actually transformed a lot of different areas of my life, and I watched it do the same for some of my friends. So I just have to do a little shout out on here and just say thank you for being obedient to what God called you to write. I'm so excited that you are bringing out another book in April of next year. Like, I already can't wait. And I'm sure this has been such a journey for you too, like as you were going through and developing the pages and the stories that you integrated in on your own personal journey. So I would love to know, as kind of, following up on all of that. It's been over a year now. So what do you feel that God has taught you through this journey, if you don't mind me asking, since your book came out, and what have you learned about yourself?
Yeah, so much. And I think you and I, we've known each other online for a while and we've had a few conversations. I can tell we're a little bit wired similarly. And so I definitely have an achievement type bent to my personality. I always have. And so when I think about something like writing a book, that has kind of always been my this will probably never happen kind of pipe dream type of goal. And I married my husband in 2019, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, and God really stripped away everything that was comfortable or familiar to me. I moved 9 hours away from my friends and family and joined my husband in ministry in Mississippi. And while I had the beauty and the excitement and the joy of the beginning of a marriage, it was actually a really hard season for us. We got married about 10 months before the pandemic. My husband was leading a church through something the world had never experienced before. And we were trying to figure out how to be married hours away from our support system. And
Wow.
yet it was in that season that God stripped away so much of what I loved about my life here in Tennessee in order to create capacity for me to have the time to walk down the path of finding an agent, writing a book proposal, getting a publisher, and actually writing the book. Wow. And it was interesting. A few weeks ago, we went back to Mississippi. I was speaking at a retreat and my husband was preaching at a church that Sunday. And for whatever reason, I just felt so strongly that I needed to go back to our town where we were for about 3.5 years. And I wanted to see some friends. And on my way in, I stopped by our old house. And just in the moment that I've described how hard the season was, there's part of you that would think I wouldn't really have any emotion going back into that space.
Yeah.
But as I pulled off the interstate, I just found myself super emotional. And I think grieving what I never grieved when we left, because I was so excited to come back to Tennessee. And I prayed on my way down, and this felt like a silly thing to pray, but I said, Lord, if you would just work it out where the person who's renting our former home, I would just love for them to not be home when I stop by, so that it's not weird if I stop the car and just take a picture with my book and just get to be in that space again, because it was the first home we ever had in our marriage.
Yeah.
And I stopped and I could just recognize God's handprint in a way that I maybe didn't see when we were in that specific season. And I think God does that a lot of times, but it made me really keenly aware of man, I was so laser focused on what I didn't have and my longing to be back home and all of those things that I oftentimes neglected to see God's hand here. And it was a really powerful moment to just surrender that to him and thank him for that. And so that was, I would say, a moment looking back that's been powerful for me. I also think just really practically, as you put something out into the world and you're an achiever and you want it to reach as many people as it can and all of those things, it's natural to begin to struggle with like, okay, well, I did it. I did the thing. I wrote the book. I put it out in the world. And do I really believe that God is accomplishing what he set out to accomplish through this message, no matter the outcome? And I talk about that in the book, right? The results are his, the obedience is ours. I felt like I was obedient to what God called me to write. I had tons of conversations like the one you and I are having right now about it, and marketed it and got it out into the world. And I'm still doing that over a year later.
Yeah.
But when you live and work in an industry that is super competitive, it is natural at times when you look at the results to go, okay, in your economy, Lord, like I see visible evidence of fruit of how you're using this in people's lives. And I continue to see that. And I may not know the full weight or the full impact of this message this side of eternity, but I trust that you're accomplishing what you want to accomplish with it.
Yeah.
And I think we can all probably take that sentiment and kind of insert it into our own work or into our own project or whatever it is that maybe we're stirring on today, or asking for his wisdom in. I think that's always something that the Lord is challenging me on, is like, trust me with outcome. I've got it. I actually don't need you to accomplish my agenda. you know?
Yeah, it's very true. And I appreciate you sharing that, because like you said, I think that is very relatable and very much understandable, because I think there's a little part of vulnerability when we release something that we've personally put so much of our heart and time and prayer and energy into. And then you have the finished product. And like you said, in a lot of these industries, I think the focus has shifted so much on, the stats and all of the things that we feel like we immediately have to achieve, whether you're an author, a podcaster, or a speaker, or even in our own industries and vocations and careers. And that has always been a big struggle for me that kept me from even starting things, because I knew once I went down that road, it was going to be a hard road, just because it's like all these people would jump on the bandwagon, or there's all people that have already been in this space longer, and maybe they're more renowned than I am, or it's just natural to start, all of those. And I think too that that is a very vulnerable place that the enemy knows he can get into and kind of squeeze in there really, really well, and start to bring in the doubt and bring in, well, is this big enough? Is this having the impact and the reach that it's supposed to be? And I think at the end of the day, and we all know this, but it's harder to it's one thing to know something, but it's harder when you have to accept it, and it's like, okay, well, God, this is in your hands now. I can't keep taking it back. And that's a hard place to be, but it also is very freeing when we're able to release it and say, God, you take it and run with it. I've done all that I can.
Yes, that's such a freeing place to be in. I love that you use that word. And man, may we seek to always be in that place with our arms just wide open of like, okay, Lord, I've been obedient to what you've called me to do, and
Yep.
you're responsible for the outcome, so
Yeah. And it's, when we look at it from that perspective, it takes so much weight off our shoulders.
oh yeah,
You
yeah,
know, 'cause it real there's so many things we can't control. so many variables and all of the things, but when we remember the powerful force that's behind it, especially when you were called, like you were called to write this book, that's very clear. Anyone who picks it up and even starts the first page can tell this wasn't something that you did on, for to make a name for yourself or for the purpose of I just love to write. I'm sure some of, obviously you love to write or you wouldn't have written a book. And I think you're learning to love it more and more because you're coming out with another one. And those things are all fine and well. But when you're called to write something, there's a whole different spirit behind it. And it does come through and come alive in the words. That's why words are so powerful. And there's a big difference when we realize this was something I was called to do. So I'm just being obedient and letting God do all of the rest. So I'm excited for you, and I'm just so excited to be on the sidelines cheering you on and watching what God continues to unfold with it. But I appreciate you kind of sharing a behind the scenes of like, what does that look like for the author? Because I'm sure a lot of us are wondering, well, how, we're the readers, we have our own part of it, but what was your experience? So that's really
Well,
good.
and I would liken it to a lot of our human experiences in our work or in our calling where we're taking that next step of obedience, like I talk about in the book, and we're being faithful and we're trusting God with the outcome. What bubbles up in us, the fear, the insecurity, the doubt, the comparison, the frustration, a lot of those challenges, it's not any different for an author than it is a project manager at a company in corporate America or whatever, right? We all have those moments. But as I talk about in the book, where are we turning when we bump up against fear or we bump up against comparison? And just rooting ourselves in biblical truth so that becomes our default. That's not the it's the rule, not the exception. That kind of our knee-jerk response is, okay, what does scripture say about this? How do I root myself in biblical truth so that when, not if, those moments come, because we're human and we live in the midst of a broken world, I know where to turn when they do happen, Yeah.
Amen. It makes all the difference in the world. And I think there's different parts of our life and places where God will allow tests to come to see how deep how quick,
Oh yeah.
how if you really, I grew up planting gardens with my grandpa was a gardener, and I remember like the little shoots that would come up and how sometimes they would just, the wind or rain or whatever would just kind of knock part of them out, and you'd see the little bit of root sticking out of the ground, and I'd go and try to push it back in. And you really think about life and how it is so important to keep your roots deeply grounded in God's word. And when those trials and those storms come, because they will come, we're able to survive it and then grow in spite of it and flourish as God has called us to do. And I truly believe He wants us to flourish. I think He wants us to live abundantly and not in a deficit. Not that there won't be times in our life where we will have deficit, but His goal is for us to live abundantly and our work to be blessed abundantly. And that's a beautiful place to be. Hey friends, sliding in here really quick to talk to you about OneShare Health. It is a Christian health share company that is such a phenomenal option for those of us who are looking for health insurance, but kind of want to think outside the box when it comes to that coverage. This is a product that I have looked deeply into and I personally use, endorse, and share with other people, and has blessed so many families like ours. The rates are phenomenal, the coverage is amazing, and I just love what they stand for and the integrity behind the company and the products. So if you're a family, a business owner, or an individual that is looking for health insurance options that are outside of what you find in traditional, like through the ACA or other types of venues, I want to encourage you to check out One Share Health. It's super easy to enroll, and I can share the link in the show notes for you so that you can easily access different types of plans. And if you need help, just remember I am here to answer any questions that you have. So give it a try, check it out, and I hope to be that resource for you in this realm. So thanks for listening, guys. So I would love to know, I'm going to be nosy again, but
nosy, yes.
Yes, I have another question. I wanted to know, what was your prayer originally when you wrote your book, and have you seen that unfold in your own life?
Yeah, I would say for both this book and my second book, God in both instances has given me kind of a word to pray that has just kept coming back. And I'll share maybe the one for my next book sometime later. But for this one, I prayed that it would be a multiplier, that not just, hey, I want to sell a bunch of copies and it multiplies in number in that way. Sure, that would be great, but truly that it would be a kingdom multiplier, that women would read it. And as a result, their impact would be multiplied. Their ministries would be multiplied. Their courage to take that next step would be multiplied. In every facet of that, I pray that it would be a multiplier. And sometimes, and you alluded to this a minute ago, sometimes God affords us the gift of seeing the fruit of our work this side of heaven. And that's a gift.
Yep.
Sometimes we don't get to see it. And women have read this book that I will never know. Women have taken steps of obedience and moved forward in their calling in ways that I'll never know. And that's, I look forward to knowing that maybe one day in heaven when the Lord and I are talking about none of it will matter then. That's the reality. But,
right.
But here on earth, we live in kind of in between two gardens, right? It's not as it should be because of sin. And so we live in this meanwhile in between space. And yet God, in his mercy and in his grace, gives us glimpses into how he's at work. And he's afforded me that here and there. I mean, even just a few minutes ago, hearing you share about the impact that it's had on your life, I don't take that lightly. Right? Every woman who's picked up this book will spend eternity somewhere and is stewarding a life that hopefully as a follower of Christ, she's trying to be obedient in her calling. And I want to help her do that most effectively. That's a high honor, right? And so when God gives you the opportunity to see that and see how he's using it as a multiplier, that's such a gift. And so, yeah, that's the thing I would say from the beginning that I've prayed, and I can confidently say, yes, God has given me moments where I've been able to see that.
I love that you thought to that word multiplier, because when I picture that in my head, I think of impact immediately, because, and God, one of the things that Jesus did before he ascended up into heaven, he told his disciples to go into the world and to share the news. And I believe the heart of his ministry here on this earth and what he has called us to do essentially is to be a multiplier in a sense, and to multiply his kingdom, like you said. And there's a lot of different tools and ways to do that. And that is the beauty of where, once again, pivoting back into figuring out, what is that calling? That is where the beauty lies in our gifts and our abilities and what he has called us to do, because that looks so differently for all of us. And when we're operating in that, and God is leading us through that journey, and sometimes it evolves and sometimes it takes us down a different path, originally, even a few years ago, you probably didn't think you'd end up being here having written a book and that God would call you to do that at the time because you weren't ready then. But God was equipping you, and he was taking you through seasons in your life that you could put into that book and that you could share with other people. And I just really appreciate that that was your heart behind it and that was your prayer. That's so beautiful. I love that.
Communicators and as writers, isn't that what we're always doing? Aren't our eyes and our ears just always open to how God is speaking, to what he's doing in our lives? And I feel like I'm always just having my ears peeled of like, not that everything has to go in a book one day, but as certain things will happen, there are moments where I'll think, today's not that day, but I'm probably going to write about this one day, Yeah. And I know that happened with this next book quite a bit. There's stories that are more recent in my life that I tell, and there's kind of a large swath of experience that I talk about in ways that my life has intersected with waiting and longing throughout the course of my life. And it's really, I think, a gift as well as we look back over our lives to find that thread of whatever we're communicating about, writing about, whatever. We not only see God's faithfulness, but we also see, oh, that happened in part for me, and God used it maybe to refine me in a certain way, but God also knew that I was going to write about this one day, or knew that as a result of what I walked through, he was going to choose to use it in this way. And I don't know, that's encouraging as we walk through sometimes painful seasons. To see God redeem it is a gift. Yeah.
It is. And it's important to tell, to be able to tell people in whatever way that looks like, what God is doing and what he brought you through, whether it's a deliverance or a healing or going through a hurtful time where God has closed the wounds. He does that for so many reasons. He allows us to go through things because we can use, when we do come out on the other side, the glory goes to him. And we're able to acknowledge that, I couldn't have gone through this on my own. And if it were not for his grace and his comfort, and having that in our life propels us to share, whether it's just talking to a friend about it, whether it's, sharing in your church or, whatever platform that you use. It doesn't always have to look the same for all of us, but it is important to share. And some things, we might feel called to share more than others, and that's okay. But I think it is important to remember and to share, what God is doing in our life, because it does encourage and inspire other people. And I know one of the things that you talk about a lot, first, I kind of want to touch on this because if someone's listening and hasn't read the book yet and they're wondering, okay, I get it, it's about doing the thing, but you really hone in on what it means to prioritize goals and then maximizing your gifts. And I would love for you to just kind of touch base on what that looks like. It sounds great. And for some of us, it's like, okay, well, how do you prioritize your goals and then align it so that it is maximizing your gifts? How do those two things work together?
Yeah, that's a really well-worded question. And I think as we all look at our lives and our calling, there's probably a little bit of this FOMO, like I'm scared I'm going to miss it, or it feels bigger than me and I don't know where to even start, or I'm overwhelmed at the weight of what I feel like God's called me to do. And all of those things are real. All those feelings are real because, again, we live in the midst of brokenness. And so as God calls us to and in and out of certain assignments, those things are natural to feel. Confusion is natural to feel. And so I have found that having kind of a construct activity to work through as you're maybe assessing that in your own life has been really helpful to me personally. And so I'll share one that we walk through together in the book. I call it the calling Venn diagram. So if you'll remember those types of activities, maybe in middle school, you compared and contrasted to different topics or something, and you're looking for where they intersect in the middle. We do that with our calling. And in this example, there's 3 circles that we work through that interlock in the middle. And the first one is labeled what matters to you. And so you spend some time in the book just really brainstorming what matters to you. Because guess what? God wired that within you. Where do you feel naturally gifted? What do you lose track of time doing? What wakes you up in the middle of the night? And you either dread something or you can't wait to work on something. All of those things come together in a way that God has uniquely wired you for. And so brainstorming on what some of those things are is the first bubble. The second one is what matters to God. And this is where we kind of examine how what matters to you lines up with what we know matters to God and what we see in scripture. And so for you and I, Rachel, we love encouraging women. We love equipping them with biblical truth. Both of those things matter to God too. And we see where that begins to overlap and how our gifts and talents kind of meet with this opportunity to share the gospel. And then the third circle is labeled what matters to other people. And so this is where we get really practical within wherever God has planted you in this season, whatever community you're within, whatever workplace he has you within, your local church community, other things you might be involved in, and needs that you see there that might also intersect with how he's gifted you and what matters to him. And I think what I love most about this activity is it's pretty revealing of what might bubble up there and where you might be called. But then also, if one of those circles is missing, the picture is incomplete. Right? If something matters to us and matters to other people, but doesn't matter at all to God, it's likely that maybe we've steered away from biblical truth and we need to fix our eyes on him. Just in raw, transparent honesty.
Yeah.
If it's something that matters to other people and matters to God, but it's not something that we're wired for, we're probably not going to have a lot of joy in that particular thing. Right. Yeah. And so while we all have things about our jobs and maybe motherhood or other things that we don't just consider to be our jam that we have to like navigate in our daily lives, what our true calling is should be something that intersects all 3 of those things. And so it can be pretty revealing to work through if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, Rachel, okay, Rebecca, that's great, but I don't know what that means for me. Maybe work through that. You don't need, I would love for you to buy the book, but you could also just grab a journal and write 3 circles and just brainstorm that on your own. And it's been a powerful tool for me and a lot of readers.
Oh my gosh. That was the part when I got to that part in your book that, it really helped me make sense of so many different things in my life that, like you said, I guess I had come to the conclusion that maybe all of those things couldn't all be in unity. Mm-hmm. And I think it was because I was so wrapped up in my own shortcomings or my own misgivings or confusion about what it would look like to take those bold steps, because it is a bold step. First off, even just doing that exercise and saying, okay, well, I'm going to just try this and see what, like you said, what bubbles up. And then when you see those things and you realize, okay, I did have maybe some of my priorities were out of line, and it helped me really come to know myself better, but also come to know what God had been putting in my heart all along. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. Actually, was one of the things that kind of merged in the center was my podcast. And at that time, I was very content and comfortable to podcast behind the scenes where no one could see me. And, I could just kind of keep the camera off and it was just audio. And it was so easy for me to not worry about anything. I was comfortable there. And I knew, like, I could feel that stirring. Like, this was always a passion project for me. And it was easy to kind of sit in that mode. But I did feel that He wanted me to continue growing that calling. I had felt originally, that's why I started it, was just because I felt like it was a calling. So I worked through it. I had gone through your book. I knew in my head there was something that I needed to do for that next step. And lo and behold, a few months later, I was doing a session with a friend of mine, and if she'll probably watch this and laugh. And we ran into every possible technical difficulty that you could imagine. We literally could not record the episode. So I got to the point where we had rescheduled, and still was having issues with the program that I was using at the time. And I told her, I said, you know what? We are not letting this stop us. I'm going to jump on Zoom and we're going to just record this. And she's like, okay. And she had, I think, her bathroom in the background at the time, because none of us were prepared. She didn't know where to go. And ended up being the most beautiful, because I connected with her in person. I saw her face. We had that conversation was so much different. The energy was different. I got off of that recording and I sat there and tears just filled my eyes. And I realized God had that happen to push me so that he could take me on that next step, because I was so stuck in my fear. I was so afraid. And I'm being honest about it. Like, I was really afraid of doing that, because I don't like people and I'm not really that spotlight type person. I'm more of like, let's do behind the scenes. I'm comfy that way. But sometimes God gives us that vision, that clarity, and your book helped me realize it. And it was like that tool that gave me that clarity and that illumination. But then it's up to us to act in obedience. And, sometimes we don't always act in obedience and we sit on it, and I know you probably had experiences in life too, where you sit on it and it's like, but sometimes God just takes a rug out right from under you and he pushes you to do it. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful looking back and reflecting on here. We get to do this again, and I get to now see you in person, and I'm so grateful. Like, what a beautiful gift this is. And I'm just so glad that he did that. And I think it's so cool that you were one of the tools that he used. So I just thought I would share that story.
I love that story. And I'm just so honored by that. And your encouragement means the world to me. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book. And again, it's one of those glimpses that sometimes God grants us. And so to know that he's used it in your life is just a great gift to me. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And as kind of like a conclusion to all the things that we talked about today, what are some last words of encouragement for the go-getter girl who's listening, and she knows what she needs to go after, and maybe she is feeling like I was, and she's sitting on it? Like, what can you, are you light the fire under her butt? Like, what can you do to just kind of get her out of that place? Because we all have been there. And I think that's important to recognize is, hey, we all have been there. But what are words of encouragement for her today?
Yeah. Well, I'll say, as I give this encouragement, I'll point the finger right back at myself. There have been plenty of times where I have sat on something I knew God was calling me to do. And we can probably all think of moments like that. But if you're there today, I actually define that a little bit and do the thing. And I call it deferred obedience is the term that I use if it's one of those moments where God has made it clear what our next step is, and yet we choose to delay obedience. And there comes a point where delayed obedience, deferred obedience becomes disobedient. Right. Yeah. And so one of the ways that we do that I think is a really sneaky way of deferring our obedience is, and I give some different deferred obedience personalities in the book, but one that I see most commonly in Christian women is what I call the living on a prayer gal. where we're talking with a friend and we've had conversation after conversation after conversation about this thing that God's called us to do. And our friend knows that we've not taken that first step, and they follow up and they ask us about it. And we say, I'm just praying about it. I'm just praying that God will give me wisdom, and I would love for you to keep praying for me. And hear me, I am not saying don't pray about where God is leading you and ask for his wisdom and his discernment. And the book of James 1 tells us he will give that to us liberally without reproach if we ask him for it. What I'm talking about is when he has made it abundantly clear, and yet we choose to not take the first step.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. And so if you're there, I would challenge that in you and call you up and say, what a gift that God has granted and imparted his wisdom. And now the obedience is yours. The results are his. He's made it clear. So now it's time to take that first step. And so, let's not sit in deferred obedience. Let's be a part of how God wants to work in and through us in the world. So that's what I would say to that woman.
That is really good. I appreciate you just, being honest about it, because it's important that we, especially as sisters, like I'm going to talk about it from just for all of us women, part of helping each other is, number one, to share. Number two, to pray with someone, encourage someone, but then being able to say, hey, I'm going to challenge you to level up. I'm going to tell you truth. And I'm not going to let you just sit there. It's the same, like if someone, whether they're hurting or they're grieving or they're struggling with bitterness or whatever those things are, we need people in our life who won't let us just sit in it. And I think that is important to be able, on the other side of it, to be able to say to other sisters, is being okay with doing that because you're doing it out of love. And I'm really glad that you kind of, I think that was a great way to kind of finish all of the things we've talked about today. And for those of you listening, we're here to encourage you out of love and out of understanding and knowing. Just know that you're not alone in that. And God, one day you'll look back and see that God had such a bigger plan than we ever could imagine on our own. And it's so worth stepping out in faith and choosing faith over fear and allowing him to lead you through whatever this is, so that you can kind of going back to maximizing those gifts. That's what he wants us to do. That's why he gave us gifts, was so we can maximize it. So that's really good. So for anyone listening, where can they find you, Rebecca? Like where do you love to show up the most? And of course, I'll link a lot of this in the show notes, but just so you can kind of shout that out a little bit.
Sure. Well, I am the most active over on Instagram. My handle is @RebeccaGeorgeAuthor. And I have the podcast Radical Radiance, which can be accessed anywhere that you like to listen to your podcast. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of those places. And you can grab the book anywhere you like to buy books: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, ChristianBook.com. And I would just love to be friends with your friends. And I'm excited to just continue serving and encouraging women. So come on over and follow, and I'm excited to share this next message here in a few months. So that's going to be fun too.
Me too. Well, thank you again so much for spending this time with us today. And I just appreciate your words of wisdom. And for those of you listening, definitely just go on over and follow, get the book. I know it will change your life too. And it was such an honor having you on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Rachel.
Well, friends, I just want to thank you for listening today. And if this show has meant something to you, please leave a review or rating on whatever platform you're listening to. Also, make sure you follow the show. This helps me continue bringing episodes like this where women can share their stories and link arms together. I hope you feel inspired and refreshed. Now get out there and hustle, girlfriends.